Grüß, willkommen in einem Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 8 of my battle series of videos. This video will cover the Battle of Labraunda, which was a battle fought between the Persians and an army consisting of Carians and Ionian Greeks from Militärgeschichte in 496 BC. This video is mainly focused on looking at the battle from a figure gaming point of view, which includes the order of battle, troop types, and flow of the battle. If you wish a big picture of why the battle was fought, then this may not be the video for you, but if you want to know about the troop types, force mixes, and what actually occurred on the battlefield, then continue to view on. This is yet another battle where I have almost no information, so once again we enter the world of educated guesses and wild speculation. I hope your salt has not run out, as it may be needed again. Incidentally, this is a photo of the Temple of Zeus and Androne, which may well have been close to the battle. You can actually see the type of woods that each side had to contend with during the battle by looking at this photo. While I'm not covering any backstory in this video, understanding where the various armies come from is useful. The Battle of Labraunda occurred after the Carians' defeat at the Battle of Maussus. The Carians were considering surrendering when they were joined by an army from Miletus. As a result, they decided to fight again, and this resulted in the Battle of Labraunda. I'm assuming the Carians used the DBMM Lydian army list for this video, and the Greeks from Miletus used, of course, the Ionian Greek army list. For simplicity, I'll refer to the combined forces as the Allied Army. Let's now start by covering the order of battle and troop types of the Allied Army. Based on the troops which may have escaped from the Battle of Maussus, the Carians consisted of about 11,000 troops. The Carians may well have received some reinforcements from their home country as well. The forces of Militärgeschichte is harder to pin down. The city probably could support an army of 10,000 men, but they had suffered losses in earlier battles, so probably consisted of much less troops. As I normally discover, the only scenario I could find concerning this specific battle was the command and colour scenario shown here. As this is about the only force mix source I possess, I'll attempt to convert this into a force mix which is historically credible. If we assume the Allied army consisted of 22,000 men, then each counter in command and cover represents about 2,000 men. We can convert this into a force mix reasonably simply, but a lot of reworking of the command and control force mix is required to make it credible. It's likely most of the Carian heavier troops were lost in the previous battle, so while some hoplites may have arrived as reinforcements, the bulk of the troops would probably need to be lighter. The bulk of the Milesian force would be hoplites, so that is no real particular issue with this particular army list. This shows a possible force mix. I've used the command and colour as the basic template and modified this based on the DBMM Lydian and Greek army lists. The only unusual point, once again, is the lack of cavalry. I've assumed most of the heavier troops were lost in the previous battle, but some reinforcements would have arrived. The Ionian Greek force is made up primarily of hoplites with javelmen. The Ionian Greeks suffered the most in the defeat, which could be explained by their heavier troops which could not escape. Let's now, as is my practice, look at the troop types through the prism of DBMM version 2.1 army lists. I personally feel the Carians probably fielded about 2,000 auxilia, which may be this troop type, warriors. The Carians also would be fielding about 2,000 hoplites, which according to DBMM are of reasonable quality, as you can see here. According to Command and Colour, the Carians fielded about 2,000 warbands or barbarian infantry, which could very well be this troop type, hillmen with drepanon. The Carians also possessed about 2,000 light infantry, which would also include archers. The rest of the light infantry, and probably the bulk of them, were armed with javelmen or javelins. Let's now look at the Ionian Greek troop types through, once again, the prism of DBMM version 2.1 army lists. We are assuming that the Ionians possessed about 2,000 javelmen. However, the bulk of the Ionian foot would be what DBMM calls inferior hoplites. As peltasts do not seem to be an option according to DBM 2.1, The Ionian army would consist of about 6,000 of this troop type. Now it's time to look at the Persian army. I previously assumed the Persian consisted of about 30,000 men in the previous battle and lost maybe 2,000 men. They may have received these losses, or replaced these losses by the time of the battle, so I'm going to stay with 30,000 men. If I go back to my command and colour force mix and assume each counter represents 2,000 men, which was the ratio I used for the Allied army, the Persian army would consist of, 30,000 men, which aligns with my current thinking. However, the troop types bears little resemblance to reality and needs to be heavily modified. So, while the number of 30,000 men may be correct, the troop composition needs to be adjusted. The Persian main infantry consisted of medium troops in the front with bowmen in the rear. Most men would be bow-armed, and the medium and auxilia combined consisted of this troop type. The lack of cavalry is, again, puzzling, but I'm not going to bother changing that. The number of light infantry is rather high, but I assume the light bow were part of the bowman portion of the Persian army, so that could explain it. As with the Carians, I've used the command and colour as my start point and modified based on the DBMM version 2.1 army lists. Once again, as per the previous battle I covered, the only unusual point is the lack of cavalry, or the very few numbers of cavalry. Let's now drill down into more detail and look at the possible troop types of the Persians involved in the battle. The Persians had 2,000 medium cavalry, which were probably standard Persian medium cavalry, which of course would include Bactrians, mediums, etc., but they're all much the same. The bulk of the light foot were probably standard Persian infantry, which by Greek standards would be considered as light. These probably consisted of about 20,000 men. It's possible some equivalent Allied troops were included in the total, but without some evidence, I'll stay with the simplest solution, which is Persian infantry. The Persians are supposed to have fielded 8,000 light troops. Some of these may have been this particular troop type, Armenians, Paphlagonians, or similar, which are basically light troops, but light troops that both threw javelins and also would get in to do some meleeing if they had the opportunity to do so. Included in this 8,000 light troop numbers, some of them would have been skirmish archers, similar to the ones that I'm showing here, Parthians, Bactrians, Scythians, etc. Finally, the remaining light troops of our 8,000 total would include javelinmen in a skirmish type format, as we list here: Mylians, Mysians, Pisilians, Berythians, etc. The exact location of the battle is unknown, so I'll try and use this map to try and pinpoint a possible location. The battle appears to have taken place in a reasonably narrow valley. I really have no idea where the battle was fought, but modern Labraunda resides in the red box. This is on the way to Caria, so perhaps the Persians would need to pass through this area, with the red arrow showing the way to Caria. The question is, which way did they come down from? There are several choices, 2 choices specifically. They could have come down the pathway shown or indicated by the red arrow. However, this is a narrow area and has a lot of difficult terrain, so it would be easily blocked by the Allies. Thus, I doubt this was the path of the Persian army. This shows the most likely path for the Persian army. The valleys are wider and the roads easier going. If I was the commander of the Allied army, I would pick a narrow area to ensure the Persians could not outflank me, which seems to be their major tactic. For no particularly good reason, this looks like a good spot. However, there are others not shown here, so this is a wild guess. There are other locations which may make sense. This is just what my gut feeling tells me is probably the probable location of the battle. Wide enough to field the hoplites and troops, but not so wide that outflanking can occur. If we zoom down into this spot, this is what the terrain looks like: a bottleneck with wider ground on each side. The ground is reasonably flat, but is covered in woods. It's likely it was covered in woods in the past as well. The question is, where would the Allies defend? They could defend the position in front of the woods, to the left, or in the open area on the right past the woods. This is the battlefield according to the command and colour. This could be very accurate, as the Greeks have a wood to the rear. The flanks should be closed off with woods as well, but the gap here is about 2,000 metres, so the map edges would represent the flanks. I must admit I'm a bit surprised as I arrived at this possible location before I looked at this particular map. I was only uncertain of if the Greeks would defend to the front of the wood or to the rear. This tells me it's in the front, or at least according to the command and colour interpretation of what particularly happened. Let's now look at the battle. The Persians arrive and form up. Command and colour feels the Persians defeated the Greeks and caused heavy casualties, so I would assume the bulk of the Persian army is on the right flank. The woods behind the Greeks is not thick, and it would be possible to cross through this with infantry with a reasonable amount of ease. On the other hand, the ground is much more difficult on the other flank, as it also contains broken ground. The Persians attack and with their greater strength begin to push the Greeks back, or allies back. DBMM assumes Ionian Greek hoplites are inferior, so this could be very possible. I'd also suspect the Carians are more experienced fighters, and after the heavy losses in the last battle, the Persians want to destroy the weaker ally. On the other hand, it was traditional to put your best forces on the right, and this was falls in with the way the tradition works. Carians are on the right, and the Militians, which maybe are the weaker forces, is on the left. Because of this arrangement, the Greeks break and are pursued through the woods, suffering heavy losses. The Carians probably withdraw into the rough terrain and get away with most of their forces. This allows them to win the following battle, which I'll not cover as it's an ambush and as a result not very interesting. So we end another wild guess. For those wondering why I'm creating a video on such poorly documented battles, the reason why I'm doing this is to create scenarios for the Greek-Persian wars for my DBMM troop type based set of rules, which in turn is based on an SPI board game. The battle itself is possibly one of my less interesting scenarios, as the Persians outnumber the Allies probably too much. I suspect it's possible the Ally army may have been larger, perhaps the Carians received more reinforcements, but I doubt it. I'll not be covering the last battle in this campaign, as this was an ambush, and they make rather poor scenarios. This shows a possible force mix for the battle using DBMM troop types and the DBMM army list. While this does use the DBMM points value, there is a slight modification for specific types of leaders, as I'm using this for a set of rules called P17CW, which requires this. But this only changes the points value of the leaders only by a little bit, so you could still use this for a pure DBMM game. The Allied army is 108 points, and it's against the Persian army of 177 points, which is not good odds. This is also an unusually small DBMM battle as well, and with P17CW, normally this sort of game completes within 90 minutes. And so we come to an end of episode 8 of my military history video series covering another battle of the Greek-Persian wars. Alle guten Ding, kommen zu einem Ende.